Hello, my name is Olu Osha. I like talking about American presidents, and I'm continuing my discussion on the uh, transformational presidency of Lyndon B. Johnson. Now, the reason I'm focusing on President Johnson's administration is because his administration manifested uh, the um, significant markers and features that define America, modern America as we know it today, right? So a lot of the features of America that we know today, they originated during his presidency, and of course, it was a pivotal moment, right? Uh, uh, Take a look at. I've mentioned this before. The Our party system, right? Uh, After the Civil War, the Republican Party was the party seeking social justice and equality for blacks. That's not the Republican Party we know today, right? Even though they still appropriate the moniker of being Lincoln's party. Lincoln is associated with the emancipation of black people and their equality as U.S. citizens. But today, today, what we have is uh, you know, Black Americans are now they're the mainstay, they're the stalwarts in the Democratic Party, while the Republican Party now apparently is a party that is anti marginalized people, anti social justice. Well, the pretext they use, or the guys they labor under, uh, is that they're the neoliberals, and I will discuss neoliberalism later on. Neoliberalism, of course, was a doctrine developed, amongst others, by Milton Friedman, an economics professor from the University of Chicago. And the idea is that to remove government from social justice and civil rights issues and welfare, and let the free markets operate. The idea that, well, uh, uh, we already have all the tools and everything necessary for individuals to thrive and seek their social justice, as individuals on their own without the help of government. So that's the summary of what neoliberalism is all about. And neoliberals, their camp is the Republican Party, so they're not seeking social justice. It's a Democratic Party that's now seeking social justice and equality for blacks. And so you see a lot of black Americans, not just black Americans, but marginalized people, they're all under the umbrella of the Democratic Party. And that happened during the presidency of President Lyndon B. Johnson. Remember when he passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, outlawing racial discrimination, discrimination based on sex, national origin, and other protected classes. He said to his aide, Bill Moyers, that we may have lost the South, and that's a white South for our lifetime. And he was right. Now, there are other things that I want to talk about. As I said, a lot of features, modern America that we know today, just apart from the way the party system is structured today. That's, the Democratic Party being the party advancing civil rights and social justice, and where minorities find a home in, which occurred during the administration of President Lyndon B. Johnson. There are other significant features that found their origins during the administration of President Johnson, and that's what I'm going to get into today. Now, so for instance, today we have the internet. Even the revolution in information technology, it found its origins during the presidency, the administration of Lyndon B. Johnson. The internet, well, many people will say, well, the internet is a 1990s phenomenon. Actually, it found its origins in the ARPANET, right? The precursor of the internet is the ARPANET. The ARPANET was it was a project by the U.S. military, right? ARPA stands for Advanced Research Projects Agency. And so this was a project in the U.S. Military, and a guy called Bob Taylor, right? In 1966, he initiated the ARPANET project, which whose goal was to connect the computing resources of remote computers so researchers could work together. And funny enough, the Vietnam War, with the need for condensed information, expedited information, may have advanced this as well. So Bob Taylor, interestingly, he didn't have any computer science or research background. He was a psychology major, but he had worked for NASA, and he was interested in, and then he subsequently moved to the Department of Defense, working for Information Processing Techniques Office, that's IPTO, within the Advanced Research Projects Agency of the Department of Defense. And so he got interested in being able to link the disparate computing resources, in order to be able to, he had a vision that in the future that man will be able to communicate, men will be able to communicate with each other, men and women will be able to communicate more effectively with each other via a machine than face to face. And of course, that's what we have today. And so importantly though, the ARPANET developed key technologies that included the packet switching and TCP/IP protocols that were foundational to the modern internet. So the origins of the internet via the ARPANET, of course, was during the administration of President Johnson. Apart from that, apart from the from ARPANET, we also have NASA. NASA, space travel took off during the administration of President Johnson, and of course, it was his successful ability to manage Congress, get Congress to do what he wanted, get the funding that was needed. Of course, it was President Kennedy, right, his original principal, who was assassinated, who had the vision of landing a man on the moon. In 1961, he declared his vision of landing a man on the moon by the end of the 1960s. And interestingly, he made Lyndon Johnson chairman of the National Aeronautics Space Council, that was directing this NASA project. But before that, Lyndon Johnson, when he was a senator, when he was Senate Majority Leader, he had actually led successfully led the legislation that created NASA, right? NASA, of course, they're the ones who direct our space projects. Now, so he did this successfully, and when he became president, he went full steam and continued to pursue very aggressively and very effectively President Kennedy's vision to land a man on the moon. Of course, there was the first, disastrous tragedy of the Apollo 1, flight crew which killed, where a fire killed three people, three of the astronauts. But he was very effective in navigating that crisis, and he let NASA do the investigation, and he continued to get funding for NASA, which eventually successfully led to the first successful orbit of that's Apollo 8. Apollo 8 spacecraft was launched, and it was able to successfully orbit the moon, and of course that laid the grounds for the successful landing on the moon, when the first men landed on the moon via Apollo 11 on July 16, 1969. Of course, that was during the presidency of Nixon, but of course it was a work that Lyndon Johnson did very successfully. He was able to get funding for NASA from Congress. Of course, this was a very expensive project. It was in fact 4% of the national budget, but he was able to successfully navigate, manipulate, and maneuver in order to get Congress to do his bidding. And that was another aspect of Lyndon Johnson. I've listened to some of his tape recordings when he's having discussions with members of Congress and other politicians, and he's basically, he knows how to get them to do what he wants, and he maneuvers them, and they always comply. We heard the phone conversation of President Trump following the 2020 elections, where he was talking to the Secretary of State and he was asking him to find him votes, and the Secretary of State is outright defying him and saying no, that he can't do it. But I've listened to numerous phone conversations of Lyndon Johnson. Of course, he's available through historical archives now, I guess because of the Freedom of Information Act. So these are available now on the internet, various resources, and you see how he maneuvers, gets people to come along, to come on board, to agree with him, to comply with him. He's very effective at doing this, and that was a reason why he was able to get a mammoth amount of legislation passed, which pushed forward his very progressive agenda and modernized America. So he was successful, like I said, with NASA. And something else that he was very successful with was the Job Corps. He created the Job Corps through the Office of Economic Opportunity. And remember, because he grew up poor, he subsequently became wealthy, like I said, even though he was a career politician. But of course, he married a woman, Lady Bird, from a wealthy family who'd inherited substantial wealth. And of course, they invested in communications technology. And so something else he did, before I go back to the Office of Economic Opportunity, before I forget, he passed legislation for public broadcasting. We're all familiar with PBS. I love PBS and public broadcasting for televised educational programs. And so this is a main feature of American life today. We all use PBS, NPR, and so this was the significant work of President Lyndon Johnson. Again, he himself, he had a vast investment. He had a media empire, in radio and television, which is rather ironic because he felt the backlash of the media due to the Vietnam War, and there was what was called the credibility gap, because after he'd been massively popular with the elections where he won with a landslide, and Americans trusted their future with him. America, he believed that the reason the public did not support him regarding the war, and there were those massive protests against him, anti-Johnson protests every day in the streets. He thought it was because of the negative coverage of the media. So it's kind of ironic that he himself had huge investments in the media himself, but that couldn't launder his image during the Vietnam crisis. Of course, that's because America's journalists, investigative journalists, are very dogged. You have to give them that, and so they realized that it appeared that Lyndon Johnson's administration was lying to the public. He kept telling the Americans about how well they're getting out, and they're going to win in the Vietnam, that they're winning. Meanwhile, American troops were actually losing, and American youths were dying, being traumatized, in Vietnam, and so they were giving the wrong, wrong information, and so the credibility gap, arose, and so it was pervaded in the media. So let me go back to his creation of the Office of Economic Opportunity, and which was to address poverty and help at-risk youth. because America had a very high dropout rate, high school dropout rate amongst kids, and they subsequently get into trouble. But he wanted to give them a second chance through the Office of Economic Opportunity. Of course, he wanted to be able to eliminate poverty, and so these programs via the Office of Economic Opportunity were to provide vocational training, academic education, and help people to clean up and be able to get work and skills that they needed to live a meaningful, successful, independent life. And so Job Corps was created through that, and of course the Volunteers in Service to America, that's VISTA programs, these were created, and it helped to build confidence in young Americans who'd fallen by the wayside, who were at risk. So a number of these very important, significant programs, which he successfully passed, again, like I said, modernized America. He declared a war on poverty, and of course, were important. The mainstay of his administration, and which had a white backlash, was his civil rights legislation, the Civil Rights Act, the Housing and Urban Development Act of 1968, the Voting Rights Act. We can look at the immediate impact of the Voting Rights Act, right? So which it prohibited all the barriers that stopped Black Americans from voting, especially in the South. There are these poll taxes, restrictions like literacy tests, intimidation, so that blacks did not vote. Blacks, eligible voters in the South, voted at the rate of about 6%. So take a look at Mississippi. They were voting at 6.7% of the eligible population in the South. But by the time the Voting Rights Act was passed in 1968, this had increased black voter registration to 60%. So you can imagine the dramatic shift from 6.7% in 1965. It moved up to 60%, and it had an immediate impact in the South. Remember that the Jim Crow laws and the KKK, the objective was to eliminate elected black officials. We saw the crisis with the Wilmington coup of 1898, and where black elected officials were overthrown in Wilmington, North Carolina, and whites replaced them. So now with the Voting Rights Act of 1965, it doubled the number of elected officials in the South. It actually went from about 72 black elected officials to 159 within 1 year, right? So and so you can see how the Voting Rights Act and the courage of Lyndon Johnson in pushing the Voting Rights Act forward, and all these other civil rights legislation that addressed and checked, the marginalization and disenfranchisement of black people. So it had an immediate impact for black people. Additionally, there was the HUD, the Housing and Urban Development Act. It gave, blacks were in the cities in the North, they were relegated to living in cities and ghettos, right? So with HUD, it prohibited discrimination against blacks in housing, and it made them eligible, and they were able to move into the suburbs, right? And of course, again, this caused a backlash, the white lash, as it's often called. And then you have the white flight, where many, white people actually left entire neighborhoods in the suburbs, and they became predominantly black neighborhoods. A case in point is like Maryland. Prince George's County. Prince George's County used to be a predominantly white suburban community, and with HUD acts and these new laws prohibiting discrimination in housing, when whites had black neighbors, it precipitated the white flight, and they moved out of entire neighborhoods, and then they become predominantly black. Like I said, Prince George's County in Maryland. It used to be it's one of the richest black majority counties in America. It's a county in Maryland, and so these were significant landmark legislation that transformed America. It provided greater opportunity for minorities. I've talked about the Immigration and Nationality Act, which ended the barriers to immigration and removed the national origins quotas that previous racist administrations had enacted, had imposed, which barred Asians from being able to immigrate. And then you see today, Asian Americans, they are a feature, permanent feature, a very significant feature of American society today. You see the success of Asian Americans. In fact, the richest average household in America is actually Asian American. It's Indian American, and you can see the rates of participation in the professional sectors, in colleges. That's another issue. I don't want to deviate, but anyway, it changed. It's the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 transformed the should I say racial, the ethnic landscape, of America, and so that's transformed a lot. And of course, today we're seeing a lot of backlash. Another white lash from this transformation that's taken shape. So Lyndon Johnson's presidency was very significant, and let me see, what have I left out? There's so much to talk about concerning Lyndon Johnson's administration, but in any event, he also passed gun control. Right, he passed gun control with the death of assassination of Bobby Kennedy. He passed gun control successfully. People don't often give him credit for this, but he did successfully pass Gun Control Act, which prohibited people with mental illnesses and convicted felons, and others, certain restricted certain persons from having access to handguns. Importantly, though, so people are still, and you can see that, gun control, Second Amendment rights, it's a very contentious issue till today, and I think I should use the opportunity to talk about the mischaracterization of the inclusion of the Second Amendment in the Bill of Rights in the U.S. Constitution. The original reason why James Madison included the Second Amendment in the Bill of Rights in our Constitution, those reasons no longer exist today. So there's no real justification. We don't have the original justification to retain Second Amendment rights. Our country has transformed significantly since then. Now, when the Second Amendment was included in the U.S. Constitution, we had slavery in the South. The South had concerns about being able to suppress slave revolts, right? So they needed local state militias to be able to bear arms, whites to be able to bear arms immediately. Obviously, not the slaves couldn't have arms, but the whites to be able to bear arms immediately, possess arms, so they could suppress slave revolts. There were slave revolts. Remember, there was Gabriel's rebellion, which was actually it was quashed before it even took off. It's a rumor. There were blacks, Pharaoh and Tom, who were able to alert their enslaver before Gabriel and his associates were able to execute the slave revolt. So At the beginning of America, at our founding, obviously we didn't have the network, the sophisticated network of roads and effective transportation we have today. Now, if the slave-owning southern states relied on federal troops and did not have state militia or individuals, whites who could bear arms, who possessed arms themselves, they would be overwhelmed. They would not be able to easily have reinforcements, if there was a slave revolt. They wouldn't be able to manage those plantations. So the reason the Second Amendment, the right to state militias and individuals, these individuals who bore arms were white men, right? The reason why they needed to be able to bear arms was to be able to suppress immediately any slave revolts, right? To be able to police the plantations and suppress slave revolts immediately. We don't have slavery anymore. So that fear is no longer in existence. That's one. The second reason James Madison feared, and Thomas Jefferson feared it as well. The southern states feared, especially James Madison, like I said, they feared an over-centralized, a very powerful national government with a powerful standing army, because they feared that a standing army could be taken over, controlled by a dictator who would now establish a monarchy in America, dominating the states. This was a real fear that the Americans, the founding fathers, especially the southern states, had, because remember that while the Southerners, the Virginians, were Francophiles, especially Thomas Jefferson, he loved the French, he was happy with the French Revolution, the chaos, the anarchy that was going on. Alexander Hamilton, the genius, Alexander Hamilton was an Anglophile. He admired the British. In fact, in the Constitution, he originally wanted the president and the senators to have life tenure. He didn't get that. Remember that our founding document, our original Constitution, was a series of compromises. The North, the South, people didn't get what they wanted, and so people didn't get everything they wanted. They weren't satisfied with what they had, so they made compromises that, okay, we'll do with this, and that's why they left the Constitution elastic, that they could alter it. Of course, the process of alteration is very difficult, but they left it open, that they left it universal with the ability to alter things in the future, right? So they feared Alexander Hamilton, had tendencies of becoming a dictator, right? They made these accusations throughout his life. Remember, this was the era of Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon Bonaparte did not seize power until 1799, after about a decade after the Constitution had been ratified and adopted. But Thomas Jefferson, founding fathers, constantly feared France. They feared Napoleon so much. It was one of the reasons why we acquired Louisiana. We wanted to. We had the Louisiana Purchase, right? And the largest land purchase, over 820,000 square miles of land, our largest purchase on the American continent. So they feared that Alexander Hamilton or any other person could become an adventurer and take over the federal government and become a dictator and establish the monarchy. This was a fear that Southerners had. Alexander Hamilton was a very brave soldier during the Revolutionary War. He actually won a lot of accolades. He was a member of what was called the Order of the Cincinnati. And in fact, at one time during John Adams' administration, he was the second in command. Because at some point during the Revolutionary War, after he resigned from the military, went to practice as an attorney. Of course, he became a politician. He became our first Secretary of the Treasury. But at some point during John Adams' administration, when he instituted taxes, and there were rebellions all over. There was a whiskey rebellion. He joined the army, and he was able to get George Washington. George Washington loved Alexander Hamilton, right? And people always, made past rumors that he was his secret son, that he was actually his George Washington may have actually really been the father of Alexander Hamilton, because George Washington had once spent some time in Nevis, but of course there's no truth to this. George Washington, during the John Adams administration, was placed at the head of the army, and Alexander Hamilton became second in command. He was Inspector General of the army. He became a major general. He was second in command of the army, and they went to ready to put down rebellions wherever they were resisting taxes or threatening insurrection, which was happening. It was actually occurring. There was a whiskey rebellion which occurred. Was that in Western Pennsylvania? So they had to go and put that down. There were all sorts of rebellions going on, and so the Southerners, especially Jefferson and Madison, they feared that Alexander Hamilton could transform into a military dictator like Napoleon Bonaparte if they had a very strong standing army. So Madison resisted a standing army. He did not want a standing army. They wanted a common defense, right, to be able to prevent Britain from coming back and grabbing them again as a colony, or any other European powers from fighting them. So the South wanted a common defense. But again, remember, the Atlantic Ocean separated the American colonies from the adventurers in Europe. So they liked that. But these European powers still had colonies on the Americas. Hence, during James Polk, the idea of the manifest destiny was advanced. They wanted to, expand America from the Atlantic coast all the way to the Pacific coast, right? The belief that it was their destiny, to expand America all the way to dominate and possess all of the American lands, right? The lands on the Americas, contiguous America. So the fear of that standing army existed back then. But that fear is moot, because now today we do have a standing army. We not only have a standing army, what Jefferson feared. He put that Second Amendment in order to forestall the need of a standing army. But that's a moot point, because we not only have a standing army, but we have the strongest army in the entire world. We have military bases all over the world, right? Our military budget is almost $1 trillion, is about $850 billion. Our military institution, the Department of Defense, is now called the Department of War, is more than half the American government. So the purpose of the Second Amendment, to prevent a standing army, which James Madison, Thomas Jefferson hoped to forestall, no longer exists, right? There's no justification there anymore, because we do have the strongest army, standing army in the world. And the other reason for having a militia, that's slavery, to suppress slave revolts. We don't have slavery anymore, right? The Second Amendment, the fact the Second Amendment still exists is very questionable. There's no real justification for it, especially for a civilized country, right? We are the most technologically advanced. We have the strongest military in the world. We have these very laudable ideals about our government, and many nations in the world emulate us. We have the American exceptionalism, of course, which is being challenged. But again, many countries model their democracies after us, as the shining city on the hill. It means we're supposed to be a very civilized nation, as civilized as the most advanced nations, right? Uh, because of the gun violence, the rampant gun violence in America, because guns are not properly regulated due to the pretext of the Second Amendment, which there's no justification for. We do not reflect that civilization of that the most advanced nation should possess. We already have the strongest military in the world, right? Uh, the notion that American citizens can prevent, can check uh, the U.S. military is ridiculous, right? That military has been very well disciplined, right? It doesn't attack American citizens. In other nations, the citizens have attacked their nations where they're military dictatorships, right? The military attacks their citizens. Fortunately, our military has lasted a very long time. It's never, they don't typically attack our citizens. Well, I'm going to talk about it another time. There was a time under President Hoover, a reason why he was very unpopular, and the very erratic uh, General Douglas MacArthur, when there was a veterans protest during President Hoover's administration, and veterans camped outside in Washington D.C. And before the White House, and in protest because they were protesting for bonuses that had been promised to them, and Hoover was not going to give it to them. So they were protesting, peacefully camping outside, and there was a misrepresentation. There was that these people, were declaring war on the administration or something, and so Hoover or somebody had called out MacArthur, who was the head of the army, and MacArthur actually came riding on a horse, and they started to shoot and to attack the veterans, which was appalling. Um, so again, Posse Comitatus Act, uh, the U.S. Army and the Air Force, the military, they're not supposed to perform domestic law enforcement, and you can't assume that American citizens are declaring war on the U.S. military, on the U.S. government. So the Posse Comitatus Act, bars uh, the U.S. Army from performing domestic law enforcement. In any event, let me keep this short. This has gone on for a long time. Again, I'll talk about the conspiracies surrounding LBJ's administration, but I took the time to also discuss, the Second Amendment, because I was discussing the Gun Control Act that was passed by LBJ's administration, and my concerns about surrounding the Second Amendment. I thought about discussing that today. My name is Olu Osha. I like discussing U.S. presidents, and I also draw attention to color of law violations, pivoting on subordination of perjury and fraud on the courts. My rights have been violated, my human rights, my dignity. I was assaulted, attacked by Montgomery County Police on May 16, 2023 in my home. I wasn't committing any crime. I'm a law-abiding American. I was working as a federal government employee in the Department of Defense, the Department of the Navy to be specific, when I was assaulted in my home based on a rumor, a swatting, right? It was a false crisis call to the police. I was not committing any crime, and my rights have since been violated. I've been restricted. My Ninth Amendment rights have been violated. I've been restricted by a judge in Montgomery County, James Bonifant, who has shown signs of xenophobia and racism and outright fraud on the court, preventing me from traveling home to see my family. I've been in America since 1999. I'm an American citizen, but I haven't seen my mother, my family. They're there. And Montgomery County created a false man, a false Jide Iwari, a man with dementia, and a fabulous line that he's my uncle and that he's my family. My family's in Nigeria. They'd love to see me. I'm eager to clear my name. There's been a smear campaign in Montgomery County in order to retaliate against EEOC and other legitimate petitions to the government that I filed. I'll keep you posted. Thank you.